Tasha Reynolds stood at the iron gate of the Caldwell property with her fingers locked around her clutch like it was the last solid thing left in the world. She was 32 years old, a woman with a career, a lease, a whole constructed life, yet her stomach had folded itself into the posture of a girl in a department store dressing room, holding her breath so she wouldn't hear herself cry. Beyond the gate, the party had already organized itself into a kind of performance. Garden chairs filled with people who wore their thinness like credentials. Cousins who moved through the afternoon as if gravity were optional. Her Aunt Clarice, stationed near the centerpiece table like a toll booth attendant, already scanning arrivals with the quiet, practiced assessment of someone who kept a mental ledger of everyone's insufficiencies. Tasha knew exactly what entry would cost her. She felt the familiar calculus begin, the cataloging of her royal blue dress, the weight of her arms, the fullness of her hips, the way she occupied space that no one had given her permission to occupy. She heard the future whispers the way you hear thunder before the rain, not yet upon her, but already inevitable. She almost walked back to the car. She almost let the shame be louder than she was. But then, movement near the far edge of the garden. A man she didn't recognize set his glass down on the stone ledge with unhurried hands and turned in her direction. Not toward the party. Toward her. Ethan Walker crossed the lawn the way people move when they have somewhere they actually intend to go. And when his eyes reached hers light and steady, warm without performance, he didn't do what she'd spent her whole life bracing for. He didn't read her. He didn't audit her. He didn't look at her body as something to be negotiated with or corrected or quietly pitted. He looked at her the way you look at a stained glass window when the light finally comes through it, like he was only now seeing something that had always been worth seeing. The whispers didn't disappear. But for the first time in longer than she could name, they stopped sounding like the truth. She was 11 the first time she understood that her body was a problem to be managed. They were at Belmore's department store, the kind with too much lighting and carpeted floors that held the smell of other people's perfume. Her mother had pulled a dress from the rack, floral, structured, clearly designed for a different kind of girl, and handed it over the fitting room door without a word. Tasha had taken it. She always took it. The mirror in that cubicle was merciless. Long, bright, angled just wrong enough to show her everything she hadn't yet learned to name as flaws, but somehow already knew to be ashamed of. The dress wouldn't zip. She'd stood there tugging at the back panel, the fabric resistant, the zipper's metal teeth biting nothing, until her fingers went numb. She didn't call out for help. She already knew better. When she finally opened the door, dress half on, face arranged into something neutral, her mother's eyes did the thing they always did. Not anger. Not cruelty. Something quieter and more permanent. A small, airless pause, a breath held half a beat too long before her mother turned back to the rack and said, "Let's try a different cut." 4 words. Perfectly civil. Absolutely devastating. Standing now at the Caldwell gate 21 years later, Tasha felt that 11-year-old rise up through her chest like smoke through floorboards. She was still there, that girl in the too bright cubicle, still sucking in, still waiting for the pause, still translating silence into verdict. The gate was open. Tasha hadn't moved. If someone's silence ever felt louder than anything they could have said, you already know Tasha. Subscribe. Like. Share this with the woman who needed to read this today and doesn't even know it yet. Tell me in comment section where you are watching. I love to know. She found the garden by accident, or maybe by instinct, the way a person gravitates toward the least populated corner of a room when the air inside starts to feel like a verdict. The hydrangeas were thick along the low stone wall, their pale heads bowed with the weight of the afternoon sun, and Tasha let herself breathe for the first time since she'd walked through the gate. She didn't hear him approach. She only became aware of him the way you become aware of weather, gradually, then all at once. He was standing a few feet to her left, jacket discarded somewhere, sleeves rolled to the forearm, studying the far tree line as if it held something worth understanding. When he turned and found her already there, he didn't startle. He didn't perform surprise. He simply settled his gaze on her the way you set something down carefully, with intention, without rush. "You look like you needed the quiet too," he said. Not a question. Not a line. Just an observation offered like an open hand. Tasha almost deflected. She had a whole vocabulary of deflection, polished smooth from years of use. Instead, she said, "Is it that obvious?" "Only because I was looking." He said it simply, as if looking were a perfectly ordinary thing to admit. She didn't know what to do with that. Most men who looked at her did so on a spectrum between assessment and appetite. This felt like neither. His eyes, unhurried, a quiet gray-green, moved over her face the way light moves over water, not taking anything, just tracing what was already there. She was wearing the blue dress she'd told herself would make her feel armored. Under his gaze, she felt something stranger and more unsettling than armor. She felt visible. The late sun caught the curve of her cheek, her collarbone, the warmth of her deep brown skin, and he didn't look away from any of it. Not with hunger, not with pity. He looked the way a person looks when they are genuinely trying to understand something beautiful and don't want to get it wrong. There was a caution in her eyes, she knew that. She'd been told before that she looked guarded, suspicious, difficult to reach. What she'd never been told was that the caution was legible as something other than coldness. That someone might look at it and see, beneath it, the specific exhaustion of a woman who had spent years expecting to be found lacking. Ethan seemed to see exactly that. He didn't try to fix it or talk her out of it. He just stood beside her in the quiet of the garden, close enough to be present, far enough to give her room, and let her be exactly as she was. It was the most disarming thing anyone had done to her in years. The buffet had been arranged with a kind of deliberate abundance that was really just an excuse to watch what people chose. Tasha knew this. She had grown up at these tables, learned early that every plate she built was a confession, and her family the jury. She moved along the linen-draped spread with measured calm, selecting with the quiet strategy of someone who had long ago stopped eating for hunger at family gatherings and started eating for optics. A modest scoop of rice. A modest portion of everything. She even left a deliberate margin of white plate visible at the edge, a kind of preemptive apology in ceramic. It wasn't enough. Aunt Clarice materialized at her left shoulder the way a cold draft enters a room, without announcement, without welcome. She looked at Tasha's plate with an expression she had spent decades perfecting, the furrowed concern of a woman who had confused cruelty with care so thoroughly she no longer knew the difference. "Sweetheart." The word landed like a hand on a wound. "I saw Dr. Abrams recently, and he was saying that even the small portions add up when your body holds on to things the way yours does." A delicate pause. A tilt of the head. "I'm only saying it because nobody else will." The table with the specific kind of quiet that means everyone heard and no one intends to intervene. Tasha opened her mouth to say what she hadn't yet decided when Ethan's voice came from 2 seats down, unhurried and warm, like a door opening onto somewhere with better air. "Tasha, I've been meaning to ask you all afternoon." He leaned forward just slightly, his forearms easy on the table, his attention fully and unambiguously on her. "You work in social services, right? I read that the city's family reunification caseloads have nearly doubled. What does that actually look like from the inside?" It was a real question. The kind that assumed she had something worth hearing. Aunt Clarice's mouth remained open for a breath too long before she closed it. Tasha set her plate down, straightened in her chair, the whole quiet inch of it, and began to answer him. Around her, the table slowly remembered how to breathe. And for once, she let it, her voice, her knowledge, her presence, filling the space she had spent years trying to vacate. Tasha had found it by accident, retreating from the dining room's recycled air and forced smiles. She hadn't expected Ethan to follow. She hadn't expected him to ask if he could. They walked without urgency, the afternoon light settling amber through the canopy above them. She kept waiting for him to fill the silence with something easy and forgettable. He didn't. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. She glanced sideways. "Depends on the question." "When you came through that gate this morning, what were you thinking about?" She almost laughed. Almost said nothing, the way you do when you don't want to hand someone the full, embarrassing truth. But something about the steadiness of him, the way he asked it like it genuinely mattered, made the deflection feel like too much effort. "How much space I was taking up," she said quietly. "How visible I was." Whether everyone was already counting what was wrong with me before I said a word. He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone searching for the right comfort, the silence of someone who had actually heard her. "I noticed your dress first," he said. "That blew against your skin. Then the way you paused at the gate, not from hesitation, from composure. Like you were deciding whether these people deserved you. Then you walked in anyway." He glanced over. "I thought that took something." Tasha slowed her steps without meaning to. "You weren't seeing what I was feeling," she said. "Maybe," Ethan said. "Or maybe what you were feeling and what you were doing were two entirely different things. And I was only watching what you were doing." She looked at the path ahead. The oaks kept their silence around them. Somewhere behind the trees the party continued its performance, loud and certain of itself, and here, in this quieter place, Tasha felt something shift, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a room changes when someone finally opens a window. She didn't have a word for it yet, but she didn't close it. It was a throwaway line. That was the worst part. Her cousin Dara hadn't even paused her conversation to deliver it, just tossed it over her shoulder like a scrap, the way you discard something you were never going to keep. "Don't stand too close to Tasha, baby, or you'll end up in the shadow." A ripple of laughter. A redirected gaze. And then the conversation moved on, easy and unbothered, leaving Tasha standing in its wake with a smile fixed to her face like a nail through wood. She excused herself before anyone could watch the smile fail. The hallway off the east sitting room was dim and corridor cool, the kind of quiet that made your own breathing feel loud. She found a mirror above a narrow console table and stood in front of it, not to look exactly. More the way you press a bruise. Just to confirm it still hurts. Her reflection stared back, the royal blue dress, the fullness of her shoulders, the dark skin she had been told, in 100 indirect ways, was too much of everything at once. She had almost convinced herself to feel nothing when she heard footsteps and then his voice low, unhurried, carrying no apology for interrupting. "I saw you leave." She didn't turn around. "I just needed a minute." Ethan came to stand beside her, not behind her, beside, so that his reflection joined hers in the glass. He didn't ask what happened. He seemed to understand that naming it would only give it more room. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I've been in a lot of rooms." His voice was even, considered, like a man laying something down carefully. "I've watched a lot of people move through them, the ones who shrink, the ones who perform, the ones who need everyone looking at them just to feel real." He turned his head toward her, not the mirror. "I've never seen anyone take up space so beautifully as you do. And I don't think you have the first idea." Tasha said nothing. But something behind her sternum, some clenched and long-defended thing, loosened by exactly 1 degree. It was, she would later think, enough to change the angle of everything that followed. The formal dinner table was a long, candlelit arrangement of good china and bad intentions. 12 people. Crystal that caught the light and threw it in directions nobody asked for. Tasha had been seated near the middle, not quite at the edges where the overlooked gathered, not quite at the head where power pooled. Somewhere in the careful geography of in-between, which she had learned was Clarissa's preferred address for her. Ethan was 2 seats away. Close enough that she could feel the steadiness of him. Far enough that Clarisse had clearly engineered the distance on purpose. It happened between the salad and the entree, that brief, socially lubricated window when Clarisse did her best work. She lifted her wine glass with the flourish of someone about to make a toast and turned the full wattage of her attention toward Ethan. "You know," she began, in the honeyed register she reserved for announcements disguised as observations, "my niece Danielle has just come back from London. Finance. Absolutely stunning girl." She tilted her head in Danielle's direction. Danielle, to her credit, looked like she wanted to dissolve into her chair. "I keep telling her she needs someone with real vision. Someone who builds things." A deliberate pause, 1 beat too long. "Ethan, I think the two of you would be extraordinary together." The table held its breath. Tasha felt the old familiar sensation, the floor tilting, the air thinning, shame arriving ahead of schedule like it always did, like it had a standing reservation inside her chest. She reached for her water glass just to have something to hold. Ethan set down his fork. Unhurried. The way he did everything. He didn't look at Danielle. He didn't look at Clarice. He turned with the full, settled weight of his attention and looked directly at Tasha. When he spoke, his voice was even and quiet and carried the entire length of the table without effort. I'm already exactly where I want to be. 7 words. No performance in them, no edge, no apology. Just the plain, unhurried truth of a man who had decided something and saw no reason to explain the decision twice. The silence that followed was a different kind than the one before it. The first silence had been anticipation. This one was recalibration, 12 people quietly revising the story they thought they were watching. Clarice smiled the thin smile of someone absorbing a loss they intend to reclassify as a misunderstanding. She reached for her wine. Tasha didn't move. But something inside her, some tightly wound, long-suffering thing she had been carrying since the fitting room, since every whispered comment, since every dinner she'd eaten carefully so no one could count the bites slowly, without announcement, came undone. She exhaled. Quietly. Like a door opening from the inside. She didn't plan it. That was the thing she'd remember most, that it wasn't a decision so much as a surrender to something she'd been starving for longer than she knew. The music had shifted, something slow and low-slung drifting out from the estate's open doors, and Ethan had extended his hand without ceremony, without the weighted look of a man asking permission. Just his hand, open. Patient. Like he already knew she was worth waiting for. Tasha took it. She'd spent years learning to move through rooms apologetically, shoulders angled inward, steps clipped, her body translated into the smallest possible version of itself. But out here, on the lamplit stone of the garden terrace, with his hand resting at the small of her back like it had always belonged there, something in her simply refused to perform that smallness anymore. She moved. Not carefully. Not with the muted, managed grace of a woman monitoring herself. She moved the way water moves, following its own weight, trusting its own direction. Her hips found the rhythm before her mind could argue with them. Her shoulders dropped. Her chin lifted. Ethan didn't lead so much as hold the space for her to take up every inch of it. She felt eyes on them. She knew Clarice was watching from somewhere near the hydrangeas, recalibrating, recalculating. And for the first time all weekend, Tasha Reynolds let herself be entirely, unapologetically visible, and felt nothing close to shame. Only the music. Only his steady hands. Only the wild, quiet revelation that her body had never been the problem. The night had always been waiting for her to fill it. She left before the dessert course. Not in the old way, not slipping out through a side door, shoulders curved inward, praying no one marked her exit. She left the way a woman leaves when she has decided, finally and without ceremony, that she has given a room enough of herself. Ethan walked her to the car. The evening had softened into something amber and quiet, the garden lights blurring at the edges, the sound of the party reduced to a distant, harmless hum behind them. Neither of them spoke for the first few steps, and the silence didn't ask anything of her, which, she was realizing, was its own kind of gift. At the driver's door he stopped and looked at her with that same unhurried steadiness she'd felt at the gate that afternoon, when the whole weekend had still been a threat she was bracing for. "I want you to know something," he said. "This wasn't a coincidence for me. I'd like to not let it be one going forward, either, if that's all right with you." She almost deflected. Almost laughed it off the way she'd been trained to do with anything that felt too good to hold. Instead, she met his eyes and said, quietly, "Yeah, I think that's all right." He waited until she was inside the car before he stepped back. And when she pulled away down the long gravel drive, she watched him in the rearview mirror until the gate swallowed the last of him, hands in his pockets, standing still, watching her go like she was something worth watching. On the open road, alone for the first time since Friday, Tasha exhaled. Not the tight, managed exhale of a woman holding herself together in a hostel room. A real one, the kind that starts in the chest and moves all the way down, the kind that makes space. She hadn't come back with different hips or a different face or a single thing about her body rearranged. But something structural had shifted, somewhere beneath all of that. The place inside her that had spent 32 years rehearsing apologies for her own existence had gone quiet. Not silenced. Settled. She turned the music up. She let the road widen ahead of her. And she drove into the night like a woman who had finally, irrevocably, stopped making herself smaller than her own story. Every week, we come back to this space to tell the truth, through story, through characters who feel real because the wounds they carry are real. If that matters to you, subscribe. Not for the algorithm. Not for the numbers. Subscribe because you deserve a place that sees you, and you should know where to find it. And if this story moved something in you, if Tasha's exhale on that open road felt, for even 1 second, like your own, tap the like button. It takes 1 second, and it tells the next woman just like you that this story is worth her time. She's still standing at the threshold, deciding whether to walk in. Help her find her way here.